Shabbat Shalom. I'd like to dedicate our Torah learning this morning to the memory of our beloved honorary synagogue president, Bill Berman. May he rest in peace, and may his memory always be for a blessing. Of course, we've all heard of the incredible stories that Bill used to tell. From my vantage point, the one that I remember each and every time I'm in this room is where Rabbi Adler and Bill were looking over the plans for the main sanctuary, and they were talking about this stained glass that would be in front of you. Rabbi Adler said, how come the members of the synagogue get to look at this amazing view each and every week? What do I get to look at? And so sure enough, Bill put in for Rabbi Adler the stained glass at the very top of the back of the sanctuary. Don't know how often you notice that it's there, but we get to look at it each and every week and know that that was what Bill did for Rabbi Adler. Of course, they had a special relationship, as Bill did with all of the rabbis here at Shaarey Zedek, and really with each one of us. And I'm reminded, Bill used to always tell me when he built this bima, he told Rabbi Adler very clearly that he was going to build a clock into the shulchan. And of course, when you're up here for an aliyah, you see that there's a clock right there on the shulchan. And Bill told Rabbi Adler very clearly that should the sermon exceed 18 minutes, that Bill also built a trap door into the floor of the bima. And should he exceed 18 minutes, he would fall right into that trap door. And you all wonder why I give my sermons from down here. In one of my last conversations with Bill, we were talking, and he said to me, Rabbi, God has been good to me. What an amazing way to go through life. And that's how he did each and every day, saying, God has been good to me. May Bill rest now and always in peace. May his memory always be for a blessing. And may it inspire us to deeds of charity, of kindness, of leadership, of support for this congregation in particular and the Jewish people in general. And may we always remember, like Bill did, that God has been good to us. What do you do when life catches fire at 30,000 feet? This past June, Rebecca and I celebrated our 15th wedding anniversary, and I have coming up, God willing, in just a couple weeks, a special birthday. And so we decided that it was the right time to go to Israel. It had been, after all, 4 years since I'd been there. And our kids, Caleb and Ayal, 9 and 6, had never been to Israel. The time seemed right to go. And all the more so, we knew after telling Caleb that we were going to be going to Israel and seeing the fear that it generated, that Davka, this was more than a family trip or a vacation of some kind. This was in many ways a mission to educate and to inspire our kids that they should please God come back and tell stories about Israel to their friends. And as many of you know, I'm not exactly the world's best traveler. I invoke God's name every minute of every flight that I'm on. You want to find somebody hard at prayer, see me on an airplane. So sure enough, we found great prices out of Toronto to Israel direct. And we drove to Toronto. If anyone wants to go there, great deal. And we walked onto the airplane, and my first sign that maybe I should be more nervous than normal was that every seat had along its side an ashtray. That tells you how old the airplane was. There was an ashtray in every chair. And one TV for the entire airplane. El Al at its finest. About 25 minutes into the flight, we heard a boom. And Caleb, who was sitting on the window seat, and Rebecca next to him, saw flames shooting out of the engine. All the lights on the airplane went out, and we saw something pouring forth from the engine. A few minutes go by, and the pilot comes on. We've had an engine failure. We are jettisoning fuel now. We're planning to turn around and go back to Toronto. We anticipate a safe landing. We saw flight attendants and people from the cockpit running back and forth along the aisle, looking out at the engine. Now, I've been asked now several times, did everybody throw their arms up in the air and scream on the airplane in that moment? And that's not what happened. There was quiet. People were holding hands, hugging each other. Found out later that the pilot had called Mayday, that he took us out over Lake Ontario in order to jettison the fuel, and that in those 45 minutes, the pilot spoke with Toronto, and Toronto asked the question of the pilot, how many souls are on board the airplane? Taking stock for the just in case, God forbid. They were scary, harrowing moments, and as I said, it was a quiet on the airplane. Afterward, when we landed, I heard the two people sitting in front of me, who I watched for those 45 minutes holding each other. I heard those two people introduce themselves to one another. We've been hugging for 45 minutes. We probably should know each other's names. What do you do when life catches fire at 30,000 feet? So many of us have been in similar situations, maybe not on an airplane when it catches fire, and you have to wait to see what's going to happen next to your life, and it's entirely out of your control. Some of us have had life catch fire at 30,000 feet because of cancer, because of heart attacks, because of other diagnoses, because of other life-threatening situations. So many of us have had that experience of life catching fire at 30,000 feet, of our entire future being out of our control, and life itself being at risk. What do we do? And so it is that I turn to our Torah, of course. And if you turn to this week's Torah portion, Parashat Va-Yiggash, and you're welcome to turn with me, I'm on page 276. 276. We're nearing now the culmination of the Joseph story. Joseph has all of his brothers there before him. They're trying to secure food because of the famine that exists in Israel. And Joseph is appearing before them not as Yosef, but as Tzofnat Paneach, as the second in command over all of Egypt. And the brothers are standing there before him. And Joseph says to them, you go back and you get your father and you bring him before me. But you keep Benjamin, your youngest brother, here with me while you go back, and this way I'll make sure you come back before me. Judah steps forward. Judah, the same man who was involved in Joseph going down and descending into the pit and then coming into Egypt. Judah says, no, 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 keep me. Let my brother go free. In that moment, Joseph sees that his brothers have changed. They've grown, they've matured. They've done teshuvah, repentance. And so Joseph can't keep it in any longer, though he stands there before them as Tzofnat Paneach, as his second in command over all of Egypt. Joseph sends out all of the guards from his chambers, and he's just there with his family. And he breaks down. And there we are on page 276, Genesis chapter 45, verse 3. Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. Joseph says, I'm Joseph. Is my father still well? But the brothers couldn't answer him. They were so dumbfounded on account of seeing Tzofnat Paneach, the second in command over all Egypt, actually being their long-lost brother, Joseph. So Joseph says to them, come closer, come forward to me. And when they came forward, he said, "It's me, your brother Yosef, he whom you sold into Egypt." Now you can only imagine their response in that moment. They thought Yosef was dead. They thought their own lives were at risk. Yosef thought he might never see his family again. And in that moment of close encounter, what happens? I'm now on 277, verse 14. With that, Joseph embraced his brother Benjamin around the neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. He kissed all his brothers and wept upon them, and only then were his brothers able to talk to him. What do we do first in a moment of crisis? We bring our family close to us. When life catches fire at 30,000 feet on an airplane, or through cancer, or heart disease, or other ailments and diagnoses, or when a gorilla approaches us, what do we want to do? We want to bring our family close, as close as possible, to hug them and kiss them. I'm reminded of the story Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav used to teach. There was a man, a very poor man, living in Krakow. He was poor but pious, and each and every day he would pray to God for the resources to pay for food for his family, to continue to live in the apartment in which they lived. And each and every day this man would pray and hope and consider the poverty that he lived in. One night he went to bed and he had a dream. And in his dream, he learned that he should go to Vienna in Austria. And there, next to the Grand Palace, was a certain bridge, and under that certain bridge was a treasure. And with that treasure, the man from Krakow could pay all of his debt. Well, he, like all of us, dismissed the dream. And the next night, the dream occurred to him again, but with a voice, and the voice said, "No, I just told you how to solve all your problems. Why aren't you going?" Yet again, the man dismissed the dream, and he woke up the next day and worried all day long like he had before. And he went to bed that night, and once again, the dream spoke to him and said, "What are you waiting for? Go, go, go." So sure enough, the next day, the man woke. And he walked all the way from Krakow to Vienna, tired, exhausted, hungry. Finally, he arrived in Vienna, and he came across a palace that looked exactly the way it did in his dreams. And he saw a bridge that looked exactly the way it did in his dreams. And as he approached that bridge, he was arrested by a guard. Now they began talking to each other, and the guard said, "Where are you from?" The man said humbly, "I'm from Krakow." The guard said, "Krakow? That's so interesting. Every night I've been having these dreams that there's some man in Krakow. And in his house, hidden behind the stove, is a treasure. Can you believe the irony that here you're from Krakow, and I keep having this dream about some guy from Krakow who has a treasure behind his stove?" They kept talking, and eventually the guard said, "I'm not worried about you." And he sent the man along his way. The man looked under the bridge and didn't see anything, but then he had an idea. And he raced home, and he looked behind the stove of his own house. And sure enough, there behind the stove was buried treasure. He had to go all the way to Vienna to realize that his treasure was waiting for him right at home. Sadly, for too many of us, it takes a crisis or a tragedy or a scare to realize that our treasure is right there at home with us. We have to use these opportunities in life, when life catches fire at 30,000 feet, to remember our family, to love them with all of our heart as often as we can, to forgive those of our family who may have harmed us or wronged us, to tell our children, our spouses, we love them, to live life with our family to its fullest. That's one lesson we learn, that when life catches fire at 30,000 feet, in the midst of that crisis, you bring your family as close to you as possible. But there's another life lesson when life catches fire at 30,000 feet, and that's also in our Torah this morning. Here, Yosef has encountered his brothers, and they've reunited. And Yosef says to his brothers, now, do not be distressed or reproach yourself because you sold me here to Egypt. It was to save life that God sent me ahead of you. Yosef continues, it's now 2 years that there's been famine in the land. There are still 5 years to come in which there shall be no yield from tilling. God has sent me ahead of you to ensure your survival on earth and to save your lives in an extraordinary deliverance. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. And God has made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of all his household, and ruler over the whole land of Egypt. In that moment of extreme crisis, all we can do is bring our family close and love them as much as we can. But once the crisis has begun to alleviate itself, the next thing we need to do is ask the question, what is God's purpose in keeping me alive? Why am I here on earth, and what do I need to do? Because clearly God has made a decision that my time is not yet up. What am I going to do now? God has a plan for every one of us. Yosef knew it. The prophet Yirmiyahu, the prophet Jeremiah reminds us the same thing. God has a plan for each one of us, and though we might go through tsuris and ve, God has a plan for each one of us. After they finally got us off the airplane and back to a hotel, we spent the night in a hotel in Toronto, waiting for them to fly another airplane from Israel to bring us there to the Promised Land. And I wasn't sure what to do in that moment. A lot of me wanted to go home, to just get my family into the car and come home. But there was another part of me that said, if we don't get back on an airplane again, if my children don't get back on this airplane again, we're never going on an airplane again. And a part of me said, if we don't expose my kids to Israel now especially, what are they going to take back with them? What relationship are they going to have with Israel after this? And I came then upon the lobby of the hotel, and there was a religious man in a full black suit and a long beard and a big black kippah. And I went up to him and I said, Atam amin ba'otiyot, do you believe in signs? Do you believe in signs? What signs are there? And he says to me, my Hebrew's not so good. Do you mind if we talk English? And I said, that's fine. He says, I don't believe in signs, but I do believe that God is every day testing us. And of course, my head went to earlier in Genesis where it says, Vayihi achar hadavarim ha'ela Elokim nisat Avraham. It was after these things that God did test Avraham. How passionate are you about Israel? How serious are you about your family? God is testing you. What are you going to do now? And in that moment, we made the decisions that we made. And we traveled to Eretz Yisrael with our family. And I'll tell you, at the end of the trip, the Saturday night, we were packing our bags, getting ready to go to Ben Gurion from Yerushalayim. And Rebecca and I looked at each other. We said, where's Eyal? Where's our 6-year-old? We found him in the bedroom, crying. He didn't want to leave home. And after coming back, I said to Caleb, the one who'd really been so scared, I said, would you go to Israel again? What did you think? Did you love it? He said, I'd go back. It's a start. When life catches fire at 30,000 feet, the very first thing we do is we bring our family close. And once the crisis has abated, the next question we ask, what plan does God have in store for me? And how can I live that plan of God's to its fullest? Friends, all of us have that moment when life catches fire at 30,000 feet. That was one of my moments. And certainly teaching my kids about Israel was one of God's plans for me, but I don't think that was God's only plan for me. And unlike Joseph, who had the power to figure out all of God's plans, I, like you, am looking to figure out what exactly it is that God kept me alive for. What's God's plan for me? Please, God, you and I should have the opportunity, the time, the wisdom to partner together to figure out what it is that God has planned for each of us. May we take the opportunity always to keep our family close. And on this Shabbat and every day forward, may I have the blessing of working with you, of partnering with you to live God's plan here on earth. Adonai oz amo yitain, Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. May God bless us with the strength to lead lives of righteousness and holiness, the strength to walk God's path. And may God bless each one of us and our families and the world with peace. And let us say together, Amen.